that I watched on coverage was great on MSNBC and CNN all across the nation. So everybody here knows that the federally mandated, the recent Department of Education cuts will impact every school district in the nation. And the national organizations of teachers and educators, NEAAFT, AAUP, they are mobilized to resist and fight back. But parents, who are a much larger group than the educators, are generally not organized. They generally don't have statewide organizations. They're generally organized around the local school district. They're focused on the municipal budgets and the state budgets. They're often even unaware of the federal dollars that come into their district, Title I, Pell Grants, etc. So this Books Not Bombs campaign is an effort to leverage the support of NEAAFT and AAUP to reach out to local advocacy groups like Progressive Democrats, like Our Revolution, like Peace Action, like Mothers Out Front, many of whose members include parents, grandparents, students, and teachers. And the political goal is to raise up the importance of federal education funding in the 2026 midterm election. At present, it is invisible as a social political issue. There's no congressional caucus supporting public education, even in the progressive caucus. We had Jamal Bowman, he got knocked off. We need some new leaders. But in reality, this requires recognizing and rejecting the excessive allocation of our tax dollars to military programs rather than civilian needs. That's where a lot of the money is going. Now, we're very happy to have with us. We'll start off with Dept McCarthy, a longtime classroom teacher, currently serving as the vice president of the 110,000 member. It's probably 120,000 by now. Mass Teachers Association. She's been a leader in the effort to liberate our public schools from the chilling destructive effects of standardized high-stakes testing, as well as pressing for increased funding from the state legislature. Deb, take it away.
Thank you. An absolute honor to be here. For those of you who don't know, the name's Dept McCarthy, 25 years in the classroom. I would leave the classroom specifically to dedicate my time full-time to the elimination of the tying of a diploma to the passage of a one-time test score. And while our students are so much more than a score, really, the other piece of it that is just as criminal is that we are privatizing public education with the use of a test score, a billion-dollar industry. But thanks to many of you here on this call, we successfully passed the ballot question last November, question 2, excuse me, one day. And I am here to talk about the fiscal crisis that is impacting us here in Massachusetts at the expense of $1 trillion military budget. And it's simply criminal and it's evil. And I'm just going to name it. And I just thought that I would quickly talk about 3 events in the last 2 weeks to just give you an idea of just how deplorable the situation is for some of our educators in the classroom. I was honored to join ESPs this morning for a workshop here. And we began with a moment of silence because we had an educator in Massachusetts lose their life the other day as a result of violence in the workplace. And 3 weeks ago, I would testify in front of the Board of Education around this issue of educators and students not feeling safe in our public schools because we have choked the fiscal resources in our schools to the extent that they are not safe places. And I shared with the commissioner that we have some schools, because they are not dedicating the resources to the wraparound services that our students deserve, that they're buying Kevlar vests for our ESPs. ESPs who are making between $26,000 to $30,000 a year. We would show up at the State House last week and testify for an educator minimum wage bill that we have before the body. And 6 of our members showed up and talked about what it's like to be in a relationship with 2 ESPs here in Massachusetts, working in Worcester, but have to live with their parents because they cannot afford the $3,200 a month for rent. They cannot afford to pay off their student loans. They cannot afford the $30,000 a year for childcare. And while their comments were well received, oh, we hear you, the response pretty much from many of the electives was, but where's the money? We don't have the money. Where's the money? And I would have the opportunity the next day behind closed doors to say to one of these elects, well, I just saw your supplemental budget and you have $15 million for a world-class soccer event happening here, right? I can find the money, give me your budget. And frankly, that's the response that we hear over and over again. Where's the money? Now, happening simultaneously, and this is the part when I say that budgets are a model document, and it's time to hold folks making these decisions under that dome accountable. There is a bill that is about to be passed that is going to mandate scripted curriculum, right? Because policymakers know better than the practitioners in the field. Now, we have a superintendent from Lexington who shared with us that the curriculum for Lexington, $500,000 to $750,000. I know in Cambridge it was an expenditure of $1 million. We're asking for ESPs in Massachusetts to make $55,000 a year. So if Lexington didn't buy a curriculum that's been repackaged so that the privateer can once again siphon monies off of our public schools and into their pockets, we could take that money and pay 25 ESPs in Lexington an additional $20,000 a year. That's at $500,000. The million in Cambridge, that would be 50. So when folks tell us they don't have the money, it's a shell game. They have the money, but the money is coming from our taxes and out the door, under the dome in most places, and into the pockets of the privateers at the expense of our students, our educators, and frankly, our communities who are being underserved because we are purposefully starving public education so that we can privatize it for profit's sake. So I'm going to leave you with, because we tend to think that this only happens in communities like Brockton or Springfield, but last year when we had educators in Marblehead on the line withholding their labor, Marblehead, right? A hop, skip, and a jump from where Charlie Baker lived, one of the most affluent communities. We had ESPs making less than $13 an hour. An ESP who had been assaulted with a baseball bat. And I want to be really clear that I want to see the students in need receive first the wraparound services so that they're not put in a situation where they've been reduced to anger. So this isn't about the student, but it's about a system that isn't servicing the needs of our students first and foremost, and that puts educators on the line at the expense of all of these other things. So that's my 7 minutes, and I thank you for listening to me, and an absolute honor to be here.
Oh, thank you so much, Deb. It's great to have you leading the charge. Uh, all right, let's move on to looking explicitly at these federal cuts. We're delighted to have with us Sarah Abernathy. She's the executive director of the Committee for Education Funding, which is a nonpartisan coalition of more than 110 education associations and institutions. Prior to that, she spent close to 30 years in the federal government working on education and budget issues, both Congress and the administration, including many years in the House Budget Committee Democratic staff focusing on education, social services, job training. She knows what she's talking about. Sarah, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for inviting me to talk about this. Deb Weinstein and I are often on things together, and I am always happy to talk about federal education budgeting. I wish I had better news. Let me see if I can share my screen. So I have a short slideshow, and we'll go very quickly through it. But I wanted to, let's see if I can, always the issue of whether I can advance my slides. So just to give you a sense of what we're talking about, the tiny little blue wedge here that is non-defense discretionary funding that is just education, it is less than 2% of the federal budget. And this is where so much attention is being spent. The money makes a huge difference to teachers, to students, to families, and the community. It does not make, it's not a huge part of the federal budget. And there's a technical term for what is happening this year in the budget world. It's called a mess. The real issue is the chaos. And I think it's a feature and not a bug of what is happening. And I think that the uncertainty about what education funding will be coming from the federal government is absolutely going to have the impact of lowering education funding, even if the federal funding eventually comes through, because if states and localities can't count on federal funding, they're going to build their budgets assuming it won't be there. But between executive actions, withholding funding, multiple lawsuits, attempts to change policy, uncertainty about how much funding that was actually going to be provided because of the way the 2025 funding was done through Congress, and the administration felt they had a lot more autonomy to make changes. The fact that Congress this spring was working on this giant reconciliation bill, I don't use the same title that the administration does, but the budget reconciliation bill cut hundreds of billions of dollars over 10 years out of higher education, mostly student loan issues, but it also cut Medicaid in schools. It provided a tax credit for private school vouchers for states that want to participate. Republicans have plans, but for this coming fiscal year, which starts, actually it started this month, but it hasn't been funded yet. The president requested big funding cuts, and the House Appropriations Committee has approved a bill with big education funding cuts. But that hasn't happened. Those haven't come to pass yet. So where are we? I'm sure that all of you know government is mostly shut down because Congress has failed to pass funding for the fiscal year that started 18 days ago. And I mentioned that the president and the House Appropriations Committee have proposed huge cuts for the Department of Ed, $12.4 billion. It's 15%, but those proposals have not been enacted. In contrast, the Senate Appropriations Committee proposed and passed on a bipartisan basis a bill that essentially freezes education funding. There's been very slight cuts for each of the last few years, but that bill passed 26-3. But the reality is that Congress has really been taking itself out of the equation. It is letting the administration make decisions. And the decisions the administration has been making have been disastrous for education. Half of the Department of Ed staff is gone compared to what it was when the Trump administration started. Just last week, it seems like a long time ago now, but it was Friday, it was 8 days ago, there were more mass layoffs announced. And as far as we could tell, it's 466 Department of Ed staff. But in fact, most of that is on pause right now because of a district judge ruling. I won't get into the issue about who it applies to because the administration is choosing to disregard unions. The administration has also canceled and withheld funding in ways that has never happened before. Some of it is targeted to particular states that the administration doesn't support, or institutions or local school districts that are taking actions that abide by state law, but that the administration doesn't approve of. For example, they've also targeted certain types of spending programs. One in particular that seems really striking is eliminating funding for programs that train more teachers. There's been executive orders that conflict with underlying law. There's the fact that not only did the Department of Ed withhold funding or cancel funding, but in the last minute at the end of September, they transferred hundreds of millions of dollars from one program or from some programs to totally other ones that met the criteria that the administration met policies that they're supporting. And so I only have a couple more slides. I went too fast. What they've done so far is they've eliminated funding for 3 teacher preparation programs. It's a total of about $200 million. They've eliminated grants for some elementary and secondary education programs, mostly because they wanted to transfer that, and they did transfer that funding to charter schools programs. They also, hundreds of millions of dollars, they said they can't because of DEI issues. They can't give money to minority serving higher ed institutions, but they gave it all to historically Black colleges and universities and to tribally controlled universities because those aren't based on, they're named in law, like you either are one or you are not one, whereas minority serving institutions, you can grow into that category based on the number of students you have. They've also essentially gutted the entire Institute of Education Sciences. This is the research arm of the Department of Ed that puts out the nation's report card. It does a lot of evaluations and analysis of how education funding programs are working, but it also does formulas for figuring out how the funding should go. So this is a list of just some of the programs that I think are most in jeopardy for this coming fiscal year because they have been proposed to be eliminated both in the president's budget request and in the House Appropriations Committee funding bill that was approved with only Republican support. And again, it's a lot of teacher programs. It's programs aimed at those programs that provide funding for those most in need. People who don't speak English, migrant students, supplemental education opportunity grants. It's almost $1 billion that goes along with Pell Grants. If you qualify for very low income students going to college, it eliminates the entire adult education program. And the reality is what they've done also in the Department of Labor is cut back a lot of the job training programs. So let's just say that you finish high school or you don't quite finish high school. What are you supposed to do? You can't get job training. You can't get more adult education. They're cutting the student aid to go to college. What are you supposed to do? It's really hard. I want to end on one happy note, which is all of this that is happening is not what people want. Poll after poll show that voters want more, not less, education funding. So it's a really vocal minority of people who are imposing their will on the federal education funding. And for elementary and secondary education, for most school districts, the federal funding they receive might be about 11% of their budget. But for some school districts, it's way larger, depending on certain things. Like if you have a military base in your district, those students, their parents don't pay local and state taxes. So they rely on a program called Impact Aid that gets the sort of substitutes for it. But the reality is that a majority of red states tend to have less state and local funding for education. So the federal share makes up more of their funding. So I think it's amazing that a lot of people are voting for members of Congress that are allowing cuts to happen that are detrimental to their own constituents. And I just want to offer my tips for advocacy for people who are doing it. And you may all know this very well, but I always believe that people who are involved in education should invite their members of Congress for a field trip to go see their school, see their institutions, see their program. Use concrete examples. It's really easy to call or to write or to email or to tweet on social media. Give an example of why federal education funding matters to you. And Committee for Education Funding, where I work, has a bunch of resources on our website. It's cef.org, and you can find a lot of information about education funding there. So that's the end of my spiel, and happy to answer some questions if anyone has any.
Great. No, that's very depressing, but it's really important that people know this. I know I'm my wife and I are very active in the local public school politics, and if it wasn't for this committee, we'd never know about these federal cuts. Before we'll have questions a little later. Let's go on and continue with this big picture of the federal budget and hear from Debbie Weinstein, who's longtime executive director of Coalition for Human Needs and a kind of authority on the congressional discretionary budget that many progressive advocacy organizations look to. Debbie.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, and everyone. Sarah's right. We do have the opportunity to work together, and we're very fortunate to have had her expertise as well as Deb McCarthy's and all the speakers who are going to come. I am going to share my screen too, with any luck. Here we go, except... I gotta get to the beginning though.
Okay, we see your slides.
Okay. And let me move things around so I can actually... There you go. It falls to me, you have many wonderful education experts here. My role is to give more of an overview, as Jonathan suggested. And this time it's really been necessary to broaden it out some because of the amazing times we're in. So I'm going to go fast through some of this. This is something you all know. The Pentagon budget is huge. The spending that we do, you can see how much more than any other country of the countries that spend the most. But that's just the start of the problem now. That the expansion of the military and the role of the military that we're experiencing now is unprecedented. In terms of money, we've seen large amounts of money committed to the Pentagon in both that bill that Sarah referred to, that, one word for it was the reconciliation bill, kind of jargony. We call it big brutal, as I put in the chat, because of the grim consequences of it to so many Americans for years to come. So there's about 150 billion for military type spending. That's very unprecedented that it would be put 10 years worth, but very front loaded. And then in appropriations, that's not final yet, but that have been proposed. There's not such disagreement on this number between the amount of money that they've put for the regular appropriations plus the amount of money from that reconciliation bill. We've got over $1 trillion. But to look at this money and where it's going, there's a recent report showing an increasing share going to military contractors, up to 54% in the period from 2020 through 2024. Here's a listing of some of the big ones. And there are others that are up and comers, like SpaceX and some of the more tech firms. So you would kind of expect that there will be even greater share going to military contractors who we know get very large shares. So big, brutal, where there has been this increase for military and militarized activities of government, and I'll say more about that in a second, and not just the Department of Defense or War, but also Homeland Security. But all of that, as you well know, is accompanied by daunting, damaging cuts to basic needs programs. Over $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, the Affordable Care Act, nearly $200 billion in cuts to SNAP nutrition aid over a decade, about $300 billion in education cuts, and trillions in tax breaks. They almost any one you could think of that disproportionately helped people at the top, but they failed to extend the Affordable Care Act, expanded premium tax credit, which will expire at the end of this year. And if it is allowed to expire, premium costs will double or more than double for millions, and more than 4 million will become uninsured. There's a very recent report out from the Commonwealth Fund that shows that kind of loss in enrollment, the increasing numbers of uninsured, cost the economy money. GDP loss of over $40 billion, job losses across the country of 339,000, as you see, and states and localities will lose tax money because the economy takes a hit. So bear in mind, it's bad enough that this will harm people's health, but it harms the economy's health as well. So we know that the Trump administration wants big increases in defense, Pentagon spending, and big decreases in the domestic programs for appropriations, as you can see here. We are stuck. That's why the government is shut down, because there is not agreement on what the expenditures should be. When I talked before about the militarized enforcement directed against our own communities, when the way we talk about the war making in this country, it's different from what we had to say in years past. But we've Congress passed $170 billion as part of Big Brutal to increase the funding for anti-immigrant enforcement in all the ways that show here. And I will say there's a new a story from ProPublica that is out today, and if I can manage it, I'll put a link to it in the chat, where a former DHS official is talking about, the title of the story is Unfettered and Unaccountable: How Trump is Building a Violent, Shadowy Federal Police Force. And I don't want to take the time to quote from this senior official, maybe just a little bit, accosting people outside of their immigration court hearings, hauling them off to jail in the middle of the country where they can't access loved ones or speak to counsel, bands of masked men apprehending people in broad daylight in the streets, hauling them off, disappearing people to a third country. This is the militarization of being directed towards our own people, our own communities. At the same time, a big decrease in domestic basic programs. And if you don't count the expenditures on VA medical care, which is grouped within these domestic and international programs, we've had a cut by nearly 10% below the levels signed by Trump in 2019 in his first term. These are examples of cuts, and you've heard from Sarah about the cuts that the president proposed. That's education, but of course, it's across the board for so many programs. The Senate is less extreme than the House. I want to zip through here because I'm taking too long. But all of this is stock. And so, okay, the Senate is better than the House. The Senate is better than the president. I say, so what? Because we're in a situation where the administration is behaving lawlessly, freezing, canceling initially more than $400 billion of funding approved by Congress, laying off initially 60,000 firings since the shutdown, close to 4,200 layoffs. Courts ruled against them. Who knows what'll happen as that goes on? They've threatened around 10,000 layoffs if the shutdown continues. The administration has been refusing to spend money and running out the clock or trying to of the fiscal year. $26 billion less than would usually have been spent just because they refused to spend it no matter what Congress did. And rescissions that the Senate approved with a simple majority, reversing deals that had been made on a bipartisan basis. So how can we fight back? Why is there a shutdown right now? Because of the urgency of extending that Affordable Care Act premium tax credits. Urgent open enrollment starts November 1. We'll see those millions of people lose insurance, pay gigantically more if nothing is done. And some in Congress are saying we've got to deal with that before we reopen government. We need protections against that lawlessness that I just described. To make it harder for the executive to refuse to spend lawfully appropriated funds, keep a bipartisan majority. Other ways to fight back. Pentagon spending. Let's get rid of the Pentagon unfunded priorities list. That's a list where the Pentagon is required to say what they want that's more than what the president's budget has. There's bipartisan support for doing that. Let's get behind that. Let them pass an audit for once.
Right.
There's bipartisan for that too. There's more actions that I'll put in the chat, ways you as individuals can join in and take action. And we all did No Kings. There's an example of an action you can take. So sorry for going on so long. I'll stop now.
Thank you so much. Invaluable. Well, I mean, the one form that the resistance to militarism has taken has been on the issue of Israel, Palestine. Merrie Najimy from the MTA rank and file for Palestine, not able to join us, but two of our own folk, Owen Madaus and Cole Harrison, have been leaders in this effort, and they're going to make the direct connection to that ongoing struggle. Owen.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. A lot of what I wanted to touch on has already been expertly expressed, but let me just reemphasize a few important points. So as we see unprecedented cuts to our already underfunded education and misallocation of appropriated funds, as well as cuts to other human needs like healthcare, infrastructure, green new jobs, and food programs, it can be illuminating to see where our government's priorities are. So obviously no budget has been passed because of the government shutdown. But for fiscal year 2026, there's a proposed $1 trillion national defense budget, which is a 13% increase. Within that, there's also a plan for a decade of spending for $946 billion on nuclear weapons for an average of about $95 billion a year. And we can see this fascination and prioritization of militarization starting to seep in domestically as well, with a planned $11.3 billion just for ICE. And so it's very clear it's not a lack of funding, it's a matter of priorities. It's prioritized escalation of militarization and weapons of mass destruction over human needs. And I completely agree with Deb McCarthy that budgets are a moral document, and we need that reflected in our representatives, and we need it front of mind as we head into the midterms, because this spending, it doesn't reflect the needs of the people nor the interests. And so this increased spending on militarization at the expense of all of our needs is possibly most poignant in the example of Israel and Palestine. So I'll pass that over to Cole to share that.
Thanks, Owen. The children of Gaza are entering their third academic year without any classes. Israel has destroyed every university and public school in Gaza. There were 5 universities there before, and these were not destroyed by accident. They were destroyed deliberately, in some cases by controlled demolition by Israeli troops inside of the university. And I'll just highlight the Block the Bombs Act, which U.S. has spent $30 billion in taxpayer-funded weapons to Israel during the genocide. And this is a bill in Congress that would cut off that funding. And also Trump wants $6 billion more, though he has not officially notified Congress of the additional 6. So that funding, as well as the existing ones, would be covered by the Block the Bombs Act. So please contact your representative. I will put the link in the chat to sign on to that. I think that says it. Back to you, Jonathan.
All right. Well, it's a lot of stuff to process. Why don't we just open the floor for comments or questions, actually, to any of the 4 panelists over the next 5 minutes. I'm going to look for hands up, and I see Hayat Iman.
Hayat has one.
Hayat.
Yeah. Am I?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I was wanting to ask Sarah Abernathy for a little more information on the polls that show that 59% of voters want more education funding. So that obviously is among all parents, all families, all voters. But many are in the red states. And so I was wondering what we could do to capitalize on this groundswell of feeling that we have in common around this issue. And so is there anything more we can do to think about or talk about this opportunity that looks like we have?
It's a good question. I did a lot of soul searching the day after the election about how CEF should focus its advocacy. And up until then, last year, I had been talking about areas that were proposed for the biggest cuts, things like English language learning and some of those things. And I decided that what would likely have more broad bipartisan support to people. And, I don't actually think of education as a partisan issue, but obviously Democrats in Congress have tended to support more funding and Republicans have tended to support less funding in general. This is the first year in a while that there are no caps in place. So it's up to Congress to decide how much it wants to spend. There is no legal limit on what it can appropriate. So I have been So I don't lie to anyone. I'm a very bad liar, and I don't think that's a good way to be an advocate, but I absolutely choose carefully the argument that I make to different offices. So I have been focusing a lot on programs that like rural education or special education, things that aren't necessarily focused on populations that some folks may not want to be supporting, because anyone who needs special ed gets special ed, and rural education by definition goes to rural educators. I often focus on the job impact that in many rural districts, the school district is the largest employer. So I'll talk about jobs. I will talk about access, making people independent and providing skills. So I've been trying to think about making these arguments about, and I also try, I know that my organization has the word funding in it, but I talk about these as investments and not spending, because these are investments in human capital, except I wouldn't say it that way. I would say investments in people and job creation and all those things. I need to go look and see if there's any more recent polling. This is something that one of CEF's members, All for Ed, came out with this spring. It was a poll they did in November. But it doesn't really matter when the polls have been taken. They consistently show the same thing. And one of the polls I didn't talk about here, but like the destruction or dismantling of the Department of Ed, that is also not what the people want when you ask them. So.
Thank you. Other responses on that front from our other panelists on where there's a place where we can raise the fight, so to speak. Deborah Weinstein.
Well, there are polls that don't always talk specifically about education, but that do talk generally about, the health and nutrition cuts that are in the big brutal bill, and the public does not support them. And there are repeated polls that indicate that. So I would just say, in fact, there are even stories about Republicans wanting to get together and sort of rebranding their bill, which they had called, which it hardly gets out of my mouth, the one big beautiful bill, which is why we say big brutal instead, but because it wasn't working for them. But I think Sarah's absolutely right. And we just need to keep pressing what is an advantage. Actually, the public does not want this. And they don't like that rich people, billionaires and corporations are getting these $1 trillion of tax breaks, while everybody else is going to have to pay. So we should press that advantage and not sort of think that people don't agree with the stance that we're taking here.
All right, we're going to continue this and trying to answer this question in the subsequent panels. Let me thank all of you for participating and turn the chair over to Suleika Soto from Citizens for Public Schools, who's going to chair our second session.
Yes, thank you, Jonathan. Can you see and hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So hello, everyone. My name is Suleika Soto, and I'm a proud Boston Public Schools graduate, a parent, and a longtime advocate for public education. I was born in the Dominican Republic and came to Boston as a multilingual learner myself. And today, both of my children are multilingual learners, and one has an IEP. So I know firsthand what it means to fight for schools that see, support, and that value every child. So for years, I've organized along parents and educators to make sure that families are heard and respected. So I really appreciate, Jonathan, what you said in the opening and recognizing that parents and parents and families, caregivers don't have a union. So it is important for us to be at these kind of events to learn what we can do to raise our voice and to make sure that we're at the table. So about Citizens for Public Schools, it's a statewide advocacy org dedicated to defending and improving public ed for all children here in Massachusetts. And CPS stands for Equitable Funding, Whole Child Learning, and Democratic Control of Our Schools. Helped to push back against high stakes testing alongside Deb, Max, Ricardo, and so many other folks that are here. And we just had this powerful conversation about budgets, right? And we've heard many times how public funds reflect our value and their moral documents. And that connects directly to the next panel that we're going to hear from, which is resistant attacks on public education. And this is because the same forces that threaten to cut education funding are often those trying to control what's taught, right? Holding funds hostage unless schools change their curricula or erase honest history or silence educators, students, and communities alike. So in this session, we'll hear from leaders who are pushing back, showing how educators, families, and communities can come together to defend both resources and freedom in education. So first, we're going to start with Max Page, professor at UMass Amherst and president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association. He was a leader, a great leader in the successful and significant passage of the ballot question that removed high stakes testing here in Mass as a high school graduation requirement. And since then, he has been an active in protracting school curricula from right-wing interference or similar. So, Max?
Thank you, Suleika, and good to see you. Hope to see you on Monday as well, as we talk further about defending our victory on question 2 that you were a key part of as well. Thanks, everyone. I'm also just rushed back from like many of you, from No King's rally. We had one up in Greenfield, Mass. I think it had to be 1,000 people in a pretty small place, but a lot of support up there. So my topic is on resisting outside efforts, federal efforts, but I will also say state efforts to control the freedom to learn and the freedom to teach. And I guess just as I begin, I feel like it's really important for us always to be clear-eyed about why these attacks began or were ratcheted up dramatically in a new way on January 20th at the start of this would-be king's regime. And it just, all of us, it just keeps worth repeating that every authoritarian and fascist regime of the past century has recognized that the twin forces of public education and unions have to be crushed if that authoritarian is going to succeed in destroying democratic society. We, the MTA, are proud. We're independent, democratic, and democratic institution. We bring together workers across race, politics, gender, and religion to demand justice at the workplace and in society. And that scares the heck out of both capitalists and autocrats. And I will say, I know this personally, as my father lived in Berlin in the Nazi era and was kicked out of the schools early on in Hitler's regime. This was an important part of the gradual or fairly rapid takeover. And authoritarians like Trump and others around the world now and in the past hate nothing more than truthful history, freedom of thought, freedom of teaching and learning, as well as the places where future citizens are nurtured as independent critical thinkers and future thorns in the side of anti-democratic and unjust and the comfortable oppressors in a society. So we always like to say and believe that public education is the foundation of democracy. And this is precisely why this regime, like others around the world and in history, have focused ire on public education from the very start. So you have seen many of the trends, and I think I'm really glad that Mia McIver from AAUP is here, and they've been really remarkable in fighting back on what's happening in higher ed. And I would say that higher ed has borne equal, if not more, initial kind of attacks. And I think we heard earlier how some of the attacks have been pushed back by court victories, but also some of the funding has not been yet as terrible. I feel like we're in the eye of a hurricane, but at the university level, there has been, of course, enormous loss to research funding and the like. I'll get to that in a second. So, of course, we saw very early on these really wild executive orders demanding the end of all DEI programs, the end of all teaching of truthful history, for example, all efforts to eliminate all the protections for LGBTQ students. We've won many of those victories. I'm thankful to our national union, the National Education Association, and the AFT and the AAUP have been fighting and filing dozens and dozens of lawsuits and at least winning a fair amount of them. So that's just the effect of that. You could say there's been limited effect legally. I'm going to hedge that a bit, but also there's just the chilling effect. And that is what they hope to do, is just frighten people slowly and steadily or rapidly and harshly in order to bring about a transformation of our public schools and colleges. What I want to lift up here, though, is also, while this is focused, I know, on the federal scene, that there's worrisome trends in the state legislature and in the governor's office at the state level, which feels like it is in part unwittingly, largely, I would say, but unwittingly assisting or going along with this attitude. And I think Deb McCarthy, our vice president, referred earlier to scripted curriculum around literacy that is moving very quickly. This is a national movement, often funded by right-wing organizations to impose the science of literacy, which to freeze the notion of science is to misunderstand what science is. There's also a way in which our great victory on question 2 that Suleika just referred to and helped to win as well, where is going to be under threat because the leaders in the state house, and I mean the leader of the House, the Senate, and the governor opposed us on question 2. This is the MCAS question. And they are doing their best to try to figure out a way, how do we get as close to having a high stakes MCAS as possible while staying within the law? I think we're also very concerned about the Anti-Semitism Commission's recommendations, which we believe could further stifle learning and real learning and back and forth and argument and debate in our schools. And there's even the notion of a hotline where people could rat on teachers for promoting real learning in classroom. This is very disturbing. I'm hopeful that the guidelines just issued by the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education ameliorate some of the worst suggestions in that report. And of course, on campus, there's unfortunately, campuses have been, I think, slow to come to the fight, flirting with capitulation in the face of Trump's threats around DEI programs, on restricting free speech, on definitions of gender. You've heard what Columbia and Brown capitulated to around some of this. And as I say, I really appreciate Mia McIver and also President of AAUP Todd Wolfson, and also the NEA, which I think is joining in with greater and greater energy every day. And we just have to learn that the blackmailer and the extortionist only gains greater power when we capitulate. So part of this is strengthening our alleged school leaders, superintendents, all the way up to secretary and commissioners and governors, and our campus leaders to stand strong and not give in to the blackmailing and threats of this administration. I will say that our members are fighting back. There are we have been intense protests against censorship from Great Barrington in the far west to Danvers in the northeast. This is not new. Censorship of books and materials or efforts to do that. It is a game of whack-a-mole, but I'm very proud that MTA members everywhere have stood up and said, no way, don't do that. You can't do that. And I will note that a post we put up about the Danvers Teachers Association members pushing back on an attempt to override their professional judgment on what books they should read with their middle school students got 13,000 hits in a week. I mean, it's a sign this was a hot issue and that people were so proud that the Danvers educators said, how dare you, try to listen to a few parents who are upset about a book that we chose precisely because it will challenge students and encourage them to think critically. I will say one thing that's I'm very excited about is many of our locals are also winning protection of academic freedom in their contracts. And I'll just on this part, I'll just end by saying we have been, but we're now going to launch a new program to help our members gain access to books that they can distribute to young people all over the state. One of the simple ways, it's not easy, but it's simple and clear, is of helping our young people continue to know that our educators want them to learn to think for themselves, is to provide them with reading materials. And it is remarkable how many of our underprivileged young students do not have access to libraries and librarians in their schools or even in their communities. And that we want to do at least one part of this is by bringing more books out to our neediest students. If I can just take just a half a minute, Suleika, here at the
Half
end, I
a
know we're
minute.
moving. All right, I just want to just lift up um, about the funding issue that was talked about before. Maybe we can talk about this more in the questions and answers. What we have, of course, have to resist the federal funding fights, but I want to say that our fair share amendment has been remarkable, not only in what it's been able to do, universal school meals, free community college, free regional buses, more for construction of schools and colleges, but also that it's helping to protect against some of the worst cuts coming down from the federal government. But it's under threat, and there are ballot initiatives there that would put a $10 billion hole in our state budget and crush all the gains that we've been able to make. So hopefully we can talk about that during the discussion.
Thank you, Max. And I think it's so important what you mentioned around like holding local and state governments accountable for not playing into what the federal government is doing. And I've been, I've noticed that in our district here in Boston, and I'm like, well, it's correlating, and I think we should keep an eye out for that. So thank you. Our next speaker brings a powerful early childhood perspective. Dr. Denisha Jones is the executive director of Defending the Early Years, and an adjunct professor at Sarah Lawrence College and Howard University. Dr. Jones spent 20 years in teacher education before transitioning to her current position. Dr. Jones?
Hi, how are you? Thank you. Happy to join you guys today. Unfortunately, talking about things that have not been great. But we at Defending the Early Years, we do national advocacy around early childhood. And even though we're part of Massachusetts, and that's where we were founded, but we are a national advocacy organization. And so one of the things we had to start doing recently was to institute a threat watch alert. So I've been going through all the different headlines, different articles about what's happening, not just the government shutdown, of course, that's increased, but just overall in terms of with this new administration and the attacks that they're instituting on families and children. And so we now have, and I'm going to drop a link to that in the chat where you can sign up and see these alerts. We're posting these almost daily. I think I get a lot. Sometimes one day I'll post like 6 or 7. But what we do is share out a monthly newsletter with them included, and then we post them weekly as well to different places so that people can stay aware of what's doing. So we're particularly looking at early childhood federally, but also at the state level to see what's happening around early childhood. But then some of that is encompassed just in K through 12 more broadly. And then the other second part of that, because one is to drive awareness, is that we're launching a resistance collective. We'll be meeting with other early childhood educators about how to support each other during these times. So we're trying to do both of those two things, which is build awareness and also action around that. So I get to read all of these horrible headlines and put together this threat watch alert every day. So I'm well versed in kind of the main 2 issues that are impacting young children as one of our most vulnerable populations of society and their families. And the 2 are the attacks to Head Start, and then the second would be the recent attacks on the special education. I tried to create slides at the last minute, but I couldn't get them together. So you guys just have to bear with me, and I will try and talk slowly. So for those of you who don't know, Head Start was created in 1965 to provide early learning, family support, and health services to low-income families. It was part of Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty, and it has sustained 74 bipartisan support throughout the years. Most recently, some survey from the First Families Foundation found that 74% of Trump voters in 86% of Democrats say they support funding the program. And as to what Sarah was saying during her presentation, most rural communities in red states use Head Start. And so it's like a lot of people have been sharing articles about that, like the crux of it all, that these people are going to be the ones most harmed in rural poor states because they are the ones that are using Head Starts because it is reserved for mainly poor families in the United States. And so what have we seen so far attacking Head Start? Well, first we saw just always in general, just funding Head Start. So previous Trump administration talked about decreasing funding to Head Start. And of course, this administration also is looking at decreasing the funding, eliminating the federal funding for Head Start. But the first attack that we saw was banning undocumented children from accessing Head Start, which was a huge issue that popped up a couple months ago. There were states suing around that. I know Delaware joined a lawsuit. I don't know. As we know, the state suing is great if you're working with your state and your state is not joining a lawsuit. That's they should. But we also know they're not being enforced, right? That even when we do get a verdict in our favor, this administration is flaunting those decisions and not really doing them. So we know that we're going to need more than the lawsuits, but we want to start with that. And we have seen some judges rule that they can't do that. Again, is that being enforced? We're not sure. And so we're going to keep tracking that. But Head Start is a very important a very important program for families. I went to Head Start. My family, we were immigrants. My mother's from Panama. I was born in Panama. And we came here, I was really young in the United States with my father, who's an American service in the military. And I went to Head Start. There was a little picture of the bus that came to pick us up. It was a lifeline of a program for a young immigrant mother with her young children and to send us all off to get that early services before we were able to start kindergarten and other programs like that. So it's been around for a long time. It's very much needed and it's always been under threat, but even more now in the sense that we have direct attacks on Head Start. The other program, as we've seen recently with the government shutdown, is the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, OSERS. Recently, Trump tried to fire everybody, or the Department of Education tried to fire everybody in that department. There was a federal injunction to stop that firing during the government shutdown, but we know that the Department of Education has been targeted to be shut down across the board. So regardless of when the shutdown ends, we must be concerned that they're doing what they want to do now is to not have a government and so not have a Department of Education. And it's likely they're going to continue to pursue that. So the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services has two major responsibilities that are important to know about. Administering federal IDEA funds and monitoring states' compliance with IDEA. And we know those are two things the administration wants to do rid of, monitoring and ensuring that the funds that have been appropriated go to where they're supposed to go. So IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is federal law. So that's where this is going to get interesting because this office is doing federal law work, which is the IDEA policy, and they're ensuring that $15 billion in IDEA funding that helps states cover a variety of special education services are earmarked for those places, and that they're complying with the laws around IDEA and what's included. And so some of the services that you'll see are speech therapy, assistive technology, and early services, early intervention, $540 million in early intervention for children birth to 3, because we know that early intervention can almost ameliorate or really bring down some of these special needs by the time a child enters public school. If they receive enough early intervention services, we've seen great strides in really impacting that area. And so that's also very important as part of the funds do. So the government shut down, and what did we see? We saw that they tried to move forward to trying to fire everyone, even though that's on hold through the government shutdown. How are these funds then being sent out is the big question that people are trying to figure out what's happening in the Department of Education. Are these funds being sent to the schools and to the districts that need them? We already know that it's good funding, but it's not enough. Most states are never allowed to, they never have enough funding to cover all the special education services because they're so great, but this funding is particularly important for many states. And they say that federal revenue makes up 12% of the school district spending on special education. And so it's a huge amount of money that we need to ensure that these students and their families are receiving as well too. So we're tracking these things. We don't know how this is going to play out, but in the meantime, we need to think about what can states do around both of these issues, others as well too. We've seen cuts to other programs. I will say, even if Head Start funding is not being cut, we're tracking 3 states that are eliminating early childhood care services in particular areas. I just found an article about Michigan recently just announced cuts to their, let's see, program for young Michigan kids families lost all the state's funding in the budget cut. Just came out last night, and people were shocked that this program was taken away. So some states are dealing with the loss in funding from the federal government by already making cuts to programs that serve young children and their families. And so we need to be aware of that as well. Washington State, one of the districts there, was also reporting that they're about to cut funding that serves about 1,000 children in need. And we've seen other states as well that too are talking about. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, they're saying we're going to have to close these programs if we don't get the funding soon because we're not able to stay open. So it goes, if it's not just Head Start, it is the other states' programs that they're doing. But what can people do? And so an article by Urban Online Magazine, they talked about how state and local leaders and advocates and nonprofits can work together to support families with disabled children. And I would say the same needs to apply for just families with young children in general. So they talked about increasing the state's capacity to kind of assist families. Families don't know what's going on. They don't know what this means in terms of the services they're going to get and what they're supposed to be offered. Working with nonprofit organizations to provide assistance to parents is really important. Strengthening a state's commitment to disability civil rights by creating or expanding dedicated funding streams for special education services. So this is going to be really interesting to see which states can step up and do this. Now, on another bend, we heard recently that
I'm so sorry. We're just getting close to time, so if you don't mind wrapping up.
Yeah, no problem. I'll wrap it up. So New Mexico just increased their, they just are the first state to offer universal early childhood care. And 3 years ago, they revised their state constitution to get more money for funding to early childhood. And now they're able to offer universal early childhood. So most states need to look in to see what they can do similar to what New Mexico's doing. And the last point I'll make is that when we heard about the Secretary of Health and Human Services interrupting vaccines, states started to form coalitions to address that. And that's one of the recommendations, that create a consortium with other states to hold accountable to IDEA. States can do that, and also thinking about Head Start and early childhood services. So I just will leave that there, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Denisha. All right. So just so folks know, if you have any questions for any of the folks in this panel, please drop them in the chat. And panelists, I'm going to ask if you'll be so kind to answer them in the chat if you can. I'm not sure that we're going to have time for a Q&A. Okay, so next we have, our final speaker looks at what's happening in higher education. So Mia McIver is Executive Director of the American Association of University Professors. She taught for 15 years at the University of California and has led higher education organizing nationwide.
Thank you, Suleika. Hi, everyone. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be with you today, to be having this conversation and to be building this movement with you. I'm coming to you from Los Angeles today, where tens of thousands of people were marching peacefully and purposefully and joyfully in the streets of downtown LA. And it feels like a very exciting moment. And I'll say a little bit why. But in some ways, I feel a little bit redundant because, Suleika, what you said at the top of this session really captured it. The people who are privatizing our education systems are doing so because they want to control what is taught, learned, researched, and debated. And that is it, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. We have to keep those two things together throughout our analysis, throughout our activism, throughout our unionism. Those two things go together. So let me just lay out a few things about where we are at this moment on academic freedom and free expression in higher education. So first of all, after being subjected to horrible militarized violence in the spring of 2024, students, staff, and faculty protesters are now subject to onerous and repressive restrictions on speech and expression on campuses nationwide. You know, their students are being threatened with expulsion. Faculty are being threatened with discipline, dismissal, and termination, simply for taking a stand on issues of supreme moral importance. Then exploiting the absurd excuse that college and university reparative initiatives are discriminatory, the Trump administration has forced the closure of academic, support, and retention programs that have served historically underrepresented students well for decades. As you've already heard, billions in research funding has been held hostage as the Trump administration has weaponized it to achieve their partisan aims. And that means that ordinary people have been robbed of therapies and cures for diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, and more, as studies and trials have been interrupted or just halted outright. Recently, dozens of college teachers across the country have been fired for things they said, many in their capacity as private citizens, in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder. And now, loyalty oath compacts, engineered by Federalist Society alum May Mailman and billionaire private equity vulture Mark Rowan, illegally and unconstitutionally offer special treatment for colleges and universities that render ideological fealty to MAGA. So the state of free expression in higher ed is not good, I'm sorry to say, but on the upside, the defense of free expression is vigorous. Higher ed workers are organizing, and higher ed workers are winning. We've defeated the loyalty oath compacts at 5 of the 9 original schools where they were first offered. Jonathan, you taught at MIT. I'm betting there are others on this call today who might be affiliated with MIT. Anyone who called on President Sally Kornbluth to reject the compact deserves a lot of credit for MIT being the first to say to May Mailman and Mark Rowan and Donald Trump, thanks, but no thanks. And these victories belong to the workers and the students and the alumni who relentlessly pressured their governing boards and presidents to finally stand up to the Trump administration bullies. We've turned a wall of complicity and collusion, which has existed for the last 9 months among higher ed administrators, into a wave of resistance. So higher ed students and workers have stepped into lead where presidents and governing boards refuse to. And we've got the momentum, we're turning the tide, and we won't stop. Because the ultimate goal is not simply to prevent the dismantling of our higher ed systems by Donald Trump and his cronies. The ultimate goal is colleges and universities transform to serve the public interest. And that means, as you know, public reinvestment in higher ed federally and across all 50 states. After decades of state disinvestment from higher ed, public taxpayer funding amounts to only a tiny fraction of the budget for most public universities. Runaway tuition inflation and the donor class have filled the budget voids, leading millionaires and billionaires to now believe that they own universities because they bought them. Student debt and institutional debt are putting the future of higher ed in the hands of robber barons and financiers. And just to return to the original point, it's this privatization of higher ed that's led to the current crisis of academic freedom and free expression. And it's public reinvestment in colleges and universities that will carry us forward to a higher ed system with labor justice, educational equity, and robust free expression rights. So this is what AAUP is fighting for. We're fighting with many of you on this call today. Max Page, thank you so much for the very, very kind words. In many ways, we feel like we're following your lead and the lead of others in Massachusetts who have made enormous progress in fighting for public reinvestment in higher ed. And we're fighting alongside union members from 10 international unions, with students, with alumni, with faith groups, with community groups, with democracy groups, with civil society organizations. So we're building a coast-to-coast and wall-to-wall movement that can leverage the real power necessary to transforming higher education. That means fighting in the courts, right? Very proud of AAUP's litigation strategy in the last several months, particularly in our victory in the AAUP v. Rubio case, in which the judge found that with a resounding and clear decision that non-citizen students, staff, and faculty have First Amendment rights on college and university campuses and cannot be deported or targeted for deportation because of their expression or their political position. We're fighting in the media. We've got to change the national narrative about what higher ed is and what higher ed workers do. We transform the lives of students every single day, and we have to tell that story to counter the propaganda that higher ed is a land of toxic indoctrination. And of course, we're fighting in the streets, right? I bet a lot of us have been in the streets today. We are also looking ahead to November 7th, Friday, November 7th, as a National Day of Action for Higher Ed. I hope everyone on this call will join in action at a campus near you. And also looking ahead to May 1st of 2026 and May 1st of 2028.
All right.
Suleika, am I at time?
Yes, you are.
Great.
So
okay.
Right.
No, that's great. That's great. I'm done. Thank you.
Do you want to
everybody.
say a finishing sentence or? Okay.
No, just very, very exciting to be with you all today, and happy to be having this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. And sorry, Jonathan.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you, Suleika. I want to turn it over now to Ricardo Rosa and Representative Presley. Ricardo, you want to take the chair?
Sure. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you all, to all of the previous Books Not Bombs conference speakers. All of you spoke brilliantly about how our nation's resources belong in our classrooms, not in our weapons arsenals and the war machine. The next panel, Mobilizing for the 2026 Midterm Elections, takes us directly into one of the key spaces of the struggle. The electoral choices we make will determine whether we continue pouring billions into endless wars or finally invest in our schools, our students, and our future. So I'd like to begin. Let me introduce Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, who represents Massachusetts' 7th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Ricardo, she is not on yet.
She is not on yet. Okay.
Isn't Sophia on? That's her office.
She's there.
I just
Different
have to
name.
rename myself. Sorry.
Yes.
Where is she?
Apologies.
Sophia.
Okay, just a second.
Sophia.
No, I'm here.
Oh, Sophia.
This is Ayanna.
Yes, it's me.
Keep going, Ricardo. Presley is with us.
I know there are many bald congresswomen, but I promise you.
Congresswoman Pressley has been a champion for justice in healing reproductive.
She is.
Hello?
No. Go ahead.
Reproductive justice, justice for immigrants, consumer justice, justice for seniors, justice for workers, justice for survivors of sexual violence. Currently, Congresswoman Pressley serves on the House Committee on Financial Services and the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability, both which remain focused on legislatively addressing issues of care, concern, and consequences to the American people. Prior to being elected to Congress, she served in the Boston City Council for 8 years and was the first woman of color elected to the council in its 100-year history. Representative Pressley has been a powerful advocate for equitable and fully funded education, championing policies that center students' well-being, dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline, and expand access to learning opportunities from early childhood through adulthood. Her record reflects a deep commitment to ensuring that education is a tool for innovation and not exclusion. So let me open it up. Congressman Pressley.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. It's wonderful to sit at this virtual table with all of you. My immense gratitude to Mass Peace Action Education Fund, all of the co-sponsoring organizations and the program committee for bringing us together to address this critical issue, the future of our children's education and really the soul of our nation's priorities. Again, it's an honor to join you in virtual community here today, to be with parents and grandparents and students and educators and advocates, a coalition of people who truly understand that education is liberation, and that our children's futures are worth fighting for. We're gathered here, we're convening tonight because the Trump and McMahon budget proposal is not just a spreadsheet. It's a moral document, and it tells us exactly who and what this administration values. And it's damning. These proposed cuts to the U.S. Department of Education are nothing short of an assault on our children. I would go so far as to say it's child abuse. It's either intentionally harmful or negligent. It's an assault on working families, on Black and Brown students, on students with disabilities, on our LGBTQIA students, and on every young person who deserves to learn, to thrive, and to dream without fear or barrier. This budget would gut programs that fund school counselors, special education and after-school programs, and community schools, the very investments that keep our young people safe, supported, and seen. They want to defund public education while funneling taxpayer dollars to private interest and unaccountable charter systems. They want to dismantle the tools that narrow the opportunity gap, all while preaching about choice. But we know the truth. This is not about choice. It's about control. It is about continuing cycles of inequity that keep our communities underfunded, underserved, and unseen. As a former Boston City Councilor and now as a Congresswoman, I have seen what happens when our systems criminalize instead of care, when they push out instead of pull in, when they punish instead of protect. And that is why I've reintroduced a pair of bills, a suite, sort of my own education omnibus, if you will, the Ending Push Out Act, the Counseling Not Criminalization in Schools Act. Together, these bills are about ending the discriminatory treatment of Black and Brown students, LGBTQIA students, and students with disabilities in our schools. They are about disrupting the school to confinement pipeline and replacing it with a pipeline to opportunity, to healing, and to hope. They are about investing in counselors, social workers, restorative justice practices, and culturally affirming education, not more police in our schools. Because our children are not problems to be policed, they are possibilities to be nurtured. But we must also talk about Congress's critical role in funding education. Every budget, every appropriation, every decision that comes before Congress determines whether our schools are fully supported or left to struggle in the wind. Congress decides how federal dollars flow to Title I schools, Head Start programs, special education, after-school initiatives, and college access programs. These votes are not abstract. They directly shape the safety, support, and opportunities available to our children. Every time I review a bill, I ask, who is it lifting up and who is it leaving behind? This budget, this Trump and McMahon proposal, leaves our most vulnerable children behind, and we refuse to go back. We refuse to go back to a time when schools were segregated by race, redlined by class, and divided by fear. We refuse to go back to a time when a zip code determined a child's destiny. We refuse to go back to a time when our government treated education as an expense instead of an investment. We know that an equitable education is the foundation for a just society. When we invest in our children and in their teachers and their mental health, their safety and their joy, we are investing in the future of this nation. So I'm asking you, parents, grandparents, students, educators, join me in holding Congress accountable. And certainly holding the Secretary of WWE accountable. Call your representatives, attend hearings, demand that our federal government fully fund public education, protect Title I schools, preserve Head Start, and expand programs that make college more affordable and accessible. Our power is collective. Our movement is generational, and our cause is righteous. Let's stand together for every student, every classroom, every dream deferred, and every future worth fighting for. Because when Congress acts, when we fight, our children win, and we are fighting for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Presley. Poetic and powerful, as always. Thank you for your unwavering commitment to educational justice and your bold leadership in ensuring that every learner, regardless of zip code, income, or identity, has the opportunity to thrive. Jonathan, shall we, Congresswoman Presley, do you have time for a question or two? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, we have to transition to another event.
Got it. Got it.
So
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
But this isn't a one-off. You know, you all got me.
Right.
Okay? All right.
We'll be getting back with
Until
you.
next time, okay?
Right on. Take care. Yeah.
thanks all.
Very good. Jonathan, do we have Alan Miskey on?
Yes, we do.
We do. Okay, so let me introduce Alan. Alan is the Executive Director of Progressive Democrats of America. Alan is a longtime activist and journalist who has steered PDA's advocacy around an expansive vision of economic and educational equity, notably promoting a 21st century economic bill of rights that includes free public education and universal broadband access as national priorities. Before joining PDA in 2018, Minsky worked as a political journalist with Pacifica Radio, wrote a series of books on American sports history, and published articles on both politics and sports. And turning it over to you, Al.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
So behind me, I have City Hall, and this is the hallowed ground that I stand on of occupied Los Angeles. In 2011, this was the largest occupied camp in all of the United States of America. This is the side it started on, but the much larger grounds, it filled up entirely. On certain nights on the weekend, there was a person camping just all over all of this. And there were a few thousand people spending the night. And it was the largest occupied camp in the whole of the country. Now on the west side of downtown at Gloria Molina Park is the largest No Kings demonstration in Southern California. At the last No Kings demonstration, this was the largest demonstration in the country. I expect today that Chicago may challenge it, surpass it in size. Maybe New York will. That's because last time it was so large here because Los Angeles was the sole city in which we had an armed National Guard occupying Los Angeles. We already had the armed U.S. Marines, not many in number, but they were present. The armed National Guard were out across the parade route. If you go around to the other side of the building right now, and this is all prelude to my comments on the question I've been asked to address, which is strategy for 2026, is if you go around to the other side, you actually do have the speakers now. People are at least allowed to stand on the steps of City Hall up to a degree. Last time, it was just a phalanx of armed National Guard and you weren't allowed to stand there. There are going to be millions of people across America demonstrating. That's all sounds of joy in the background. And it, however, is incumbent upon us and an organization like PDA, of course, to translate this energy into a victory in 2026, one that may become precipitously more difficult because of a Supreme Court decision that may get solidified in the next few days around eliminating safe Democratic seats in the Southeast. But a bigger problem I want to speak about today, and I don't want to pull any punches, is we have the very difficult task at an organization like PDA of challenging the moderate Democrats, the mainstream Democrats in the primaries, and sucking it up and forging unity in the general election. And this is a very difficult thing to do because unfortunately, even in the era of Trump 2.0, the moderate Democrats have become no less appealing to the general public than they were before. In fact, I think they're even less so. And they present every bit as much a barrier to the ascendance of a politics that the American public wants and that has a really realistic chance at breaking the Republican coalition by winning over working class Americans to a Democratic Party that is reinscribing itself in the economic politics of Bernie Sanders, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the Great Society, just general progressivism applied to the 21st century. And look, the split in the Democratic Party is real, and it is a pretty severe bifurcation. I am always honored to be at Peace Action Massachusetts and Peace Action in general. You guys are the greatest, and you are a beacon of light and have been since your inception for the entire world. But if you look at U.S. foreign policy, right, if you look at the issues of the constitutional crisis of the Democrats, and if you look at the political economics, I can't think of any three bigger framings to provide for how you run national elections. And don't forget, the House election every 2 years is a national election across the entire country. All 435 seats are up for grabs, okay? And we're going to have primaries, and we're going to try to challenge sitting moderate Democrats, just as they'll try to challenge some of the progressive Democrats. And across all three of those big framings, you see a split in the party. If you want to see on the issue of the Constitution, who signed on the impeachment act that Al Green brought forward? It's the progressives. Who are going to stand to defend the Constitution, not let it slide the way that Obama did after Bush and Cheney? It's the progressives. When you look at foreign policy, nothing more clear-cut than the absolute horror of inhumanity, mass murder, genocide, starvation in Gaza, and you have a split between the progressives and the moderates. And then on political economics, again, you have a split between the progressives and the moderates. Okay, however, while they do not, in my opinion, adequately defend the Constitution, even now, they are constitutionalists, the moderates. And in this circumstance, we have to make sure of two things. We have a forceful challenge to them, that we vie for power inside the party, that champions like Ayanna Pressley, who was just on, those voices. And Ayanna Pressley has introduced some of the best progressive economic legislation that's been introduced since the squad came into existence. We at PDA, by the way, if anybody who's on here doesn't know, we, of course, are very proud to have been the sole national organization to have drafted Bernie Sanders to run for president. Starting in 2013, we launched the Run Bernie Run campaign. So we do see the new strengthened progressive movement, the squad, DSA in its strength. And I've been a DSA member as long or longer than I've been a PDA member, to be honest, okay? And Justice Democrats, all these are offspring of an initiative taken in the state of Massachusetts by one Tim Carpenter in 2013 to draft Bernie Sanders to run for president. So we need to be forceful in the challenge. We need to show the people, we need to convey and persuade right into the teeth of the consultancy class that runs the moderate wing of the Democratic Party, right up to Ezra Klein and all those people, that we have the economic politics, because those are going to be the issues that are probably going to swing the election and the Constitution, and perhaps still foreign policy. But on all three fronts, we have the majoritarian positions, and we can win national elections. And at the same time, we then have to have the difficult, because in all reality, up against the amount of money that we're up against, and again, all big money comes in for the moderates groupings, not for the wing. On all three fronts, by overwhelming majorities of Democrats, which are the progressives, we need to find a way to make sure that however contested the primaries are, and I'm not here to serve to the moderates, in no way, shape, or form will PDA ever bend to their agenda for the United States of America and the world, because it is a very, very corrupted agenda that has no interest in remaking a society with a terrible imbalances of power. They are interested in still having a constitutional republic, which is what the essence of our coalition with them is about at this hour. But we need the Democratic Party to defeat this fascist Republican Party, and we need to simultaneously convey. And so this is the key of our strategy. We need to push for the progressive wing of the party to become fully ascendant within the party. We're making progress. We're certainly making progress in polls. And then, of course, we need to win the election against the Republicans, because they're in. And then after that, also continue to push the progressive agenda with allies like Jamie Raskin, the squad, Bernie Sanders, all across the board. Both of your sitting senators in Massachusetts, by the way, one of whom, Ed Markey, I understand, is being challenged by a, again, corporatist Democrat. And so expect us at Massachusetts, PA. You can expect where PA will fall on that one. But last, I hope you can hear me. This is thrilling where I am today, and it's very brilliant. Thank you for indulging me and listening to me while I'm at this brilliant demonstration, which unfortunately I had to move around the corner, or you would have the most incredible background visuals right now. You can see all the people flocking up and going around the corner, but it was far too loud for me to do this from there. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions or follow-ups, I'll do my best to hear.
Thank you for your insightful remarks, Larry, and wishing you a powerful and joyful protest there in California. Jonathan, shall we move on to our next?
Let's bring forward Ben and Larry.
Great. I'll introduce Ben and Larry together. So first, Ben Cohen. In 1978, Ben Cohen and his childhood friend, Jerry Greenfield, opened a homemade ice cream parlor in an old gas station in Burlington, Vermont. Ben and Jerry's ice cream pioneered many unusual flavors and an equally unusual business philosophy that sought to integrate social concerns into their day-to-day business activities. In 2000, despite his best efforts to keep the company independent, Ben & Jerry's was acquired by Unilever. Currently, Ben divides his time between the Eisenhower Media Network, a group of retired military officers who support a less militaristic, multipolar world order, and Up in Arms, a campaign to shift money from Pentagon excess to social needs. He's married to Tatiana Repnikova and has a daughter, Aretha. Larry Cohen is the former president of the Communication Workers of America. He was a key advisor to Bernie Sanders in the presidential campaign and currently serves as national president of Our Revolution. Ben and Larry, turning it over to you.
Okay, great. Ben, together again.
Yeah, Cone and Cone.
So let me just say this about Ben. For the many years I've known him, the issue that's dearest to him has been the incredible waste of military spending by the United States. I think, Ben, it's fitting that it's now called the War Department, not the Defense Department. It's probably one of the few things Trump's done that you and I might agree with, because that's clearly what it's about. But in these few minutes, I think first we'll hear from Ben about Up in Arms and his continuing efforts, really decades, to get money out of politics, which I'm going to come back to, but also to really focus on the huge waste of this military spending, more by far, almost as much as every other country in the world put together. And then I'll talk a little bit about the political side of what can we do about this very specifically. So, Brother Ben.
Yes, Brother Larry. Yeah, well, it's really good to be here with the Books Not Bombs people, because, as Larry said, it's very dear to my heart. This it's kind of disconcerting to me every time when I look around and realize that we are the people we've been waiting for. We are the people that can make it happen. You always expect that, well, it's somebody else, some great savior. It ain't. We are the great saviors, and we're going to make this happen. We're going to work to change our national budget priorities. I think, you guys obviously understand it all, but I think the general public does not make the association that when the government decides to spend more money on the Pentagon, it means that there's less money available for education and schools. And so we started this Up in Arms campaign to alert the public and to educate the public about the connection and the trade-offs between those two. And Ike Eisenhower, he knew it, he said it, he named it so many years ago. And in one of his speeches called the Cross of Iron speech, he talked about the trade-offs. And at the time, it was about, a heavy bomber could buy so many bushels of wheat, and, an aircraft carrier could, what we spend on an aircraft carrier could electrify villages. But to put it in contemporary terms, today the United States is planning to build over 2,000 F-35 fighter jets, which mostly don't work. They spend half their time in the shop. They cost about $82 million a plane. And for that amount of money, we could fund salaries for 1,200 public school teachers for a year. One nuclear bomb, killed over 100,000 people in Hiroshima. Today, the US nuclear arsenal is the equivalent of 50,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. And the country is planning to spend another $50 billion a year on a whole new generation of nuclear weapons when we can already blow up the entire world at least 10 times over, 100 times over if you listen to Trump. For that 50 billion a year, that would be enough money to provide free preschool for every 3 and 4-year-old in America. And at that age, that's the most critical age that determines how a child is going to live the whole rest of their lives. We're currently building new aircraft carriers at a cost of 13 billion apiece. Many military experts are saying those things are obsolete because they're such a target. They're an easy target. And the cost of one of those is the equivalent of the cost of free community college for all U.S. students for a year. And, recently, the Pentagon didn't ask for it, but Trump decided that, wouldn't it be cool if he was the guy who had the first $1 trillion budget, the first $1 trillion Department of War budget. And so he just shoved another 150 billion at the Department of War at the same time that he eliminated inspectors general and slashed the Department of Operational Testing and Evaluation by 75% in the name of acquisition reform. So this is not about efficiency. This is about less efficiency. And as you might see, I'm wearing this hat that says dope on it. That's not because I didn't go to school. It's because it stands for the Department of Pentagon Excess. I recently took a chainsaw to a model of the Pentagon, and what do you know? $1,800 flew out of it, which is the amount of money that would go back to each taxpayer or be available for education if we were to cut 30% of the Pentagon budget, in which case we'd only be spending 3 times more than China, the next highest spending country. So I urge you to go visit upinarms.life. That's where our campaign lives. And our campaign is focused exclusively on educating the public about these issues. As other parts of that campaign, we were able to infiltrate Disneyland around August 6th, the anniversary of Hiroshima, and put a doll in there that into the It's a Small World After All exhibit that was saying, "Remember Hiroshima." And recently we helped to create this democracy ice sculpture which melted in front of the Capitol. So Eisenhower is kind of the guy that we follow, and as he mentioned, as he predicted, the military industrial congressional complex would worm its way into every corner of our society: schools, work, religion, entertainment, and it has. And Ike went on to say that the only thing that will prevent the unwarranted influence of the military industrial congressional complex is an alert and knowledgeable citizenry. I read that as education, and I salute you educators here on this call that are doing that hard work. But the people that are currently running the country, they don't want a knowledgeable citizenry. They don't want people to know how to think critically. What they want is an uneducated population, which is easy to manipulate. I think at its root, this is a spiritual issue. What do we admire as a society? Well, If you look at the statues and monuments that are displayed all over our parks and town squares, what are they of? Mostly warriors. That's what we glorify. And that's what our kids learn to look up to. We need statues of educators and peacemakers, because war is the worst of what our society has created. War and killing is not what we should be teaching our kids to aspire to. The true heroes are those who help to create a knowledgeable and caring citizenry. Those are the people we need to honor with statues. You know, it drives me crazy when I go to the airport and they call on people in the armed forces to board first. I say, let's have you guys board first. Let's have teachers board first, and let's thank teachers for their service, because how we educate our kids determines the quality of life for our entire society. We need to create a culture that's life-affirming, not death-defying. Our country, the richest nation in the history of the world, needs to learn to measure its strength not in terms of how many people we can kill, but in terms of how well we can educate and care for kids and young adults at home and around the world. Thanks.
Okay, so today I spoke at a rally in Western Maryland, Washington County, and wearing this shirt, to fund the oligarchs, and at the bottom, fund the people. That's the Our Revolution shirt from today around the country. So why rural America? And you heard a bit of this from Max near the beginning of this a couple hours ago. Politically, we have probably the worst challenge of my long life as an activist. How do we change the budget priorities? What's the starting point? Jonathan mentioned the Progressive Caucus, and I've worked with them for more than 20 years as president of the union, and obviously at Our Revolution, and electing as many of them as possible. So there is a strategy, and I've talked on a version of this program before, where we could envision a majority of the Democratic caucus being members of the Progressive Caucus. And that has some contradictions in it, because some members of Congress join that caucus so that the caucus won't endorse a challenger to them. So they're not all progressives. I'll leave it at that. But the bigger challenge, and what I really want to focus on, is the oligarchs, back to the shirt, in the Democratic Party, in the primaries in the Democratic Party, putting in one example. Last year was the worst year in terms of this by far. Suleika Jayapal, amazing county commissioner in Portland, Oregon, was way ahead. She supports all the things we would care about. It's the sister of Pramila Jayapal, one of the reasons why she was targeted. And $4 million was spent by the oligarchs, by billionaires, in the last 3 weeks, demonizing her work. Total lies. Not talking about what they care about, using the primary, the nominating process, to take out a progressive, a new progressive that we would have had in an open district. I mentioned her because most people who are on this call now know about Cori Bush, know about Jamal Bowman, and probably others. And so my own view, and I've said this before here, it's the rules, not just the rulers. Among other things, in this country, we're afflicted by what I call candidate addiction, like heroin. And I love Bernie, and I worked my heart out for Bernie, as did Ben, probably 80 hours a week, unpaid. But it's the rules. And I'm encouraged because at the DNC, at the last meeting, we were able to get a resolution passed that said, in 2028, the next presidential nominating process, and people don't know this, but the only thing the DNC actually controls is that nominating process, nothing else. Nomination of the president and one convention every 4 years. The rest of it is fundraising bullshit. We need to raise the money. I didn't mean that that's all bullshit, but anyway, leave it go at that. But a resolution was passed that, you know, me and others worked on with the new chair. He ran on this, Ken Martin, that says in the 2028 nominating process, there'll be no corporate money and there'll be no dark money. Now, that's not sufficient, but that's a huge jump forward. And that resolution says that candidates running across the country should take up the People's Pledge. And most of the people on this call are from Massachusetts. That was Elizabeth Warren's pledge in 2012. Well, what happened in the 13 years since then? And this resolution says that encourages, can't mandate, but we can mandate through the state parties, I'm coming to that in seconds, that candidates on their own, we're going to support progressive candidates, tell them we expect them to challenge anybody running against them to take the People's Pledge. And a bunch are about to do that, including some of the best progressive new candidates in the country. But more importantly, every state party, Massachusetts is a one party state. And we have people like Warren and Markey that are clearly progressives in the Senate, and in the House, Presley and a few others. But we also have people I'll call out, like Richard Neal, Ways and Means Chair, now ranking member, who supports all the military spending that we're trying to get out. And what happens in a primary against him? And we had one that had a real chance a couple of cycles ago. The oligarchs' money comes in. The corporate money comes in. The independent expenditures, as they're called, that are not regulated. But the party can regulate them in the nominating process. This is a big, dark secret. Citizens United does not apply at all. I'm emphasizing at all in the party's nominating process. Every state party can take the lead from the DNC and even go further and say, in our nominating process in Massachusetts, and county parties can do this as well. And it's not counties in Massachusetts, whatever that building block is. In most states, it's counties or cities like Boston. Those parties can say, in our nominating process, if you want to run, you have to take the People's Pledge. And if you don't take it, you won't be on the debate stage. You won't get our voters list. And we're going to call you out for getting money from the oligarchs, from the corporations, the dark money. We've had enough. And the People's Pledge, somebody just asked in the chat, says, I will support, I will repudiate all independent expenditures in this election. And if anybody runs an independent expenditure, this is where the big money is spent, billions last year. If anybody spends that money on my behalf, my campaign will have to give an equal amount to charity. So why does that work? Because the campaign money is more important than the independent expenditure. So nobody is going to run an independent expenditure, and they didn't in 2012 for Elizabeth Warren because she took that pledge. And that was in a general election. And Scott Brown took the pledge, and he had to make a donation. It wasn't huge because there was an independent expenditure on his behalf. So if the only thing we care about is this bloated, disgraceful military spending, and if we also care about the education spending or the Medicare cuts, we've got to get candidates elected in Democratic primaries, particularly if you live in Massachusetts. That party must be forced. And they were just forced on a platform fight a few weeks ago to do what they didn't want to do. But we can do that organizing. This is worse in the East Coast states, basically one-party states, like where I am, Maryland, New Jersey. New York is the worst of all. Cuomo in his primary spent $30 million. He didn't spend it, sorry. $30 million in independent expenditures for Cuomo. He wouldn't have had a chance against Ma'am Dominic, except for that money. Billionaires like Bloomberg and others. So every one of the states, there's 57 parties, including the territories, Washington, D.C., every one of those states can follow the lead of the DNC, much more importantly, frankly, and stop the dark money in the primaries. These billionaires want to spend money to defeat Trump. Great. In the general election, until we defeat Citizens United, that's fine. We're not going to stop the general election independent expenditures. But we got to stop it in the primaries, or we're going to be on here year after year, decade after decade, as many of us has been, about military spending being bloated, about the people's budget being destroyed. But we can stop it if we say to Democrats in our states, we had a brother on here from Rhode Island, it's another one-party state, that we've had it. We're going to rise up. The kind of energy we saw today, I had 1,000 people were there in Western Maryland at a rally, millions and millions of people across the country. We've got to say, yes, we're fighting Trump, no King's Day, but we're also going to make the fight in every one of the Democratic parties to stop the big money in the nominating process so we can have candidates that we truly support instead of candidates that take money from crypto and take money from the military industrial complex and take money from fossil fuel companies and take money from billionaires like Bloomberg and prevent our dreams and our love from ever being realized.
Powerful. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Ben. Larry, somebody has a question in the chat asking, what is the People's Pledge? Can you explain?
Yeah, I tried to answer that as I saw it fly by, but the People's Pledge is what Warren actually took, Elizabeth Warren, in 2012, saying, I repudiate all independent expenditures. And if there's any independent expenditure on behalf of me or attacking my opponent, my campaign will donate to a charity, a specific charity, an equal amount. And again, it takes a while to process that, but that ruins the value of any independent expenditure because the campaign would have to take that money. And that's more valuable money than any independent expenditure. And that worked. That was a general election. Scott Brown agreed. The much easier thing is state parties can say, you want to be our nominee? No dark money, no corporate money, no big money. The voters are going to pick our candidates, not the billionaires and the oligarchs and their corporations.
Thank you, Larry. Jonathan, it seems like we only have a minute left. Am I right? Should we move to closing? I don't want to lose people, but thank you, Ben. Thank you, Larry, for such passionate, powerful words. You know, as we draw this gathering to a close, let us leave here knowing that every dollar taken from war could build a library. You could train a teacher or educator, open a door for a child's imagination. You know, the fight for education is the fight for peace. When we demand books instead of bombs, we're demanding a future rooted in justice, possibility, and life. Let's go forward together, organizing, teaching, and dreaming until the world finally chooses learning over destruction. Thank you to all presenters and to all those who participated in today's conference. All right, good night to all.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Take care.
Solidarity forever.
Solidarity. Well.